Welcome to episode 224 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, the Bruins fall to the Washington Capitals 5-4 at their last preseason game at home at the TD Garden. And it was a game where Bruins fans got there, unless I'm wrong, Scott, is the last game on the road?
Yeah, last game's in New York.
Okay.
We got robbed of another preseason shootout. Just one of the great time-honored traditions of preseason hockey shootouts.
We did, and unfortunately, that was because of David Pasternak's Xbox controller died in overtime. He just didn't try to play defense, but there's a lot of takeaways from this game. I think we're starting to see which players are really making a strong case for themselves with the regular season just about a week away, I think. And obviously, Matt Poitras continues to just raise eyebrows in a positive way. It was also a homecoming of sorts, not an official because it's still the preseason, but it was a homecoming of sorts for Milan Lucic, his first game back in Boston as a Bruin in whatever it's been, 8 years or so, 7-8 years. So Bridget and Scott, it was a very entertaining preseason game with the Capitals, not a defensive masterpiece, but as I said earlier, there are some takeaways, some players that jump off the screen. And so for you guys, who do you want to discuss first?
I mean, we might as well start with Matt Poitras because he's the story of this preseason. And on Tuesday, he was playing second night of a back-to-back. He was the only Bruin player who played both Monday and Tuesday. So, and that was a clear test, right? That's, hey, you're having a great camp so far. Like, here's a test even above and beyond what everyone else is going to be tested with. And, he was on a line with Brad Marchand and Trent Frederick. Thought they started pretty slow. They didn't really do a whole lot the first two periods of the game. Spent a lot of time in their own zone. Looked kind of sloppy, not a whole lot of chemistry. And then they really picked it up in the third period. And that line started to get going, started to do some good things. And Poitras scores the game-tying goal to make it 4-4 on a great play coming out of the corner. He spins off Evgeny Kuznetsov, a proven, number one center in the NHL, and drives to the net and beats Darcy Kemper. So even on a night where he didn't have his best game and wasn't, as dominant or as noticeable as the first three preseason games, he still ends up doing something that makes a difference. Jim Montgomery after the game gave him credit for, acknowledged, hey, yeah, he lost some battles tonight, but gave him credit for bouncing back and then winning a battle and just continuing to compete. He had a shift in the third period that was almost 2 minutes where he kind of got stuck out there, blocked a shot. He was hobbling around, and it's like, yeah, okay.
There was a point that I thought he was hurt, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's not good.
Well, it was definitely a stinger. Like, I'm sure he has a pretty good bruise because he blocked that shot and was like clearly hobbled for a few seconds. But he fights through that, finishes the shift, and it's like he's clearly going all out. He's brought the effort all preseason.
You want to know how he was going all out? When we talked to him post game, he was the sweatiest person I've ever seen. It looked like a full bottle, like a full Gatorade container was thrown on top of him. He was gassed, but he was so happy. Like when we talked to him, because he said,
I think Charlie Coyle's the only one who can compete with him in the sweaty, out of breath post game interview.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that was. But he was happy as can be because he knows he made a good impression, right? I don't know if there was much more he could have done in this preseason to make the impression he wanted to. I think he showed that he's not only a playmaker, he can score. That third period for him was a big one. And if this is the last game of preseason that he's in, and your last impression of him was that third period and that goal that he had, that was a really nice goal, taking it to the net, like you mentioned, against Kuznetsov, who's a great NHL player. If that's the lasting impression that you make with 2 goals and 2 assists in the preseason, then he's pretty much done everything he could have wanted to. And like you mentioned, he played in the back-to-back. He said he was feeling a little bit fatigued in the first 2 periods, but he got a second wind in the third period, and you could tell that line did pick it up in the third, and he started overtime on out there on a line with McAvoy and Marchand or Pasternak. He was the very first shift in 3-on-3, and he also got another shift after that. So they were putting him in all situations. He was penalty killing at one point. He was on the second power play unit. They were trying him all over the place, and I guess maybe trying to see what potentially he could bring. It popped into my head too. If he's your third line center, which we'll get into our roster projections, but if he is your third line center, you need your third line center to be able to kill penalties. So they had him out there on the penalty kill a little bit, even though that's one of the places he probably needs to improve. You do need to get minutes from him there, especially you're going to want to keep your first and second line centers fresh. And however, we know that Zacha and Coyle are both really good penalty killers. So it just popped into my head how they're going to use their centers on the penalty kill this season, because it'll be different than last year. But Brian, I guess we'll just get your thoughts on Poitras too before we get into our roster projections and some of the other guys that we think are making a strong case.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen Poitras in all facets of the game, not just look not out of place, but look like he's making a difference. And 5-on-5 penalty kill, power play. I think the penalty kill, sometimes it's tougher. It's really impressive that Brad Marchand has been such a strong penalty killer throughout his career, simply for the fact that not being a long body or a long stick. Can you hear me?
Got you now.
Yeah. So penalty kill, 5-on-5 in the power play. Poitras just really excelled, and he's a gamer. I mean, he's somebody who you can just tell he wants the game on his stick. He wants to make a difference. He's not intimidated by the moment or who's lining up across from him. And I'm just, I think earlier on in camp, it's quick how it's funny how quick everybody's just changed their tone, like from, well, it's just one game, it's probably better off to send him down to the minors, back to juniors. And then it's like 3 games later, it's like, yeah, pencil him in on the second line. And it's like, I don't disagree with the latter. I'm just saying it's funny how like people are like, it's just one game, send it back to the juniors. But after 3 games, yep, second line center. It's like, well, why were you so like pessimistic on him after like the first game? It's just, again, it's people just like herd, But
like expectations, like the bar was not high, and all of a sudden he just keeps moving the bar, right? We're like maybe fourth line center, maybe third line center, maybe second line center. Like he just keeps moving the bar up and up, because he wasn't someone that we came in with knowing a lot about, thinking, I mean, he's young, so he's plenty of time to develop. And then all of a sudden he's been the one pushing the goalpost. And I think he's certainly an NHL player right now. He needs to get the 9 games, and I think he's sticking on the roster this season. If we want to do the projections or what, but I've said this to pretty much everyone I was talking to on the 9th floor. He's not going to get anything out of going back to juniors. So put him on the team. Doesn't hurt your cap situation. So what if you have to cut an extra guy that maybe, you was a free agent signing like Boquist, or maybe it's Greer, like whomever you think you need to cut to give him space on the roster, do it. Because if those guys haven't impressed you or haven't carved out a role for themselves yet, this kid has done that for himself.
Yeah, I'll push back on one thing, because I think he could get something out of going back to juniors. Like we've touched on it.
I don't think he can get as much out of it. That'd be a big, like a harder learning curve, but way bigger of a jump that he can make professionally.
Yeah, I just mean he has to shoot more, like for sure. And he's going to have more time and space to do that in the OHL than the NHL. So you want that to be a focus of his game. The one area that you can't mimic in OHL is obviously like holding up against bigger, stronger, more physical competition. But you can work on, getting stronger in the OHL rather than trying to do that during an NHL season. And he was used a little bit on the penalty kill for Guelph last year, from what I understand, but wasn't a regular part of it. So that would be another thing to add to his plate there, because even though the Bruins have used him on it in the preseason, I don't think he'd be part of their penalty kill in the regular season. I could be wrong about that, but I see at least 6 forwards ahead of him for it. All that said, yeah, absolutely keep him for the 9 games. Like, see how that goes. We've seen how much of a strong impression he's made in 4 preseason games. And Bridget, as you mentioned, he might play a 5th or he might not. They have 1 game left on Thursday. But yeah, that 9-game sample that you can keep him in the NHL without burning a year of his entry-level contract. Even Jim Montgomery said it. It's like extended training camp. It just gives you an extra chance to keep taking a look at him. And yeah, it means you cut one more person, but so be it. To me, that the payoff of keeping him around is it greatly outweighs potentially losing someone on waivers. And, as far as like going from, or, the way he's built up over camp, when I did my first roster projection last week, I didn't have him on. I had him just off, said he was very close. But the reason I didn't put him on yet was because I thought he needed to keep it going and finish as strong as he started. Montgomery has talked about that. He said the guys who end up making the team are the ones who get better and better as camp goes on, and the ones who finish strong. Guys who start strong and have a great first week and then fade, they're not making the NHL team. They're going to Providence or juniors or waivers. So he's done that. He has absolutely kept it going and has finished as strong as he started, has gotten better, has tightened areas up. So yeah, for me, he's absolutely on the opening night roster. As far as where you put him, I think we've talked about potentially taking that third line center job because Morgan Geekie hasn't exactly run away with it, and it seems to be there for the taking. On the roster projection I posted Wednesday morning, I have him on the second line with Marchand and DeBrusk, or if you want to call that 1-1A with the Zacha Pasternak JVR line, then whatever. But because to me, his skill set, the better the wingers he's with, the more you're going to get out of him, because he's a high-end playmaker. And so the more talented the wingers that he's getting the puck to me, that the more you're producing, the more you're scoring as a team. Not that he couldn't succeed if Trent Frederick and Morgan Geekie or Jesper Boquist or, Danton Heinen are his wings. Like, he could, but I feel like Coyle fits that kind of situation better, where like you're going to ask that line to do some dirty work, to hold on to the puck. We've seen it from Coyle his whole time here. He's a good third line center. I think what Poitras could do with Marchand and DeBrusk with wingers like that is going to make you a better team, because he's going to be getting them the puck in positions to score. And now all of a sudden you have a line that can make some high-end plays and isn't, with Coyle, I think that becomes more of a workman-like line with Marchand and DeBrusk, which isn't a bad thing, but I feel like putting Poitras there, it could really get the most out of his talents. And obviously, if it doesn't work, then you can slide him down or try something else.
Yeah, I think the one knock I would say for Poitras being on that line with Marchand and DeBrusk, and it's not a hindrance, I'm not doing a line because of it, it's just an observation, is that it's a smaller line in stature. And I think that, if that were to be a line that were to work out for them long term, that's awesome. They would just have to be wary of not getting out muscled as a line or knocked off the puck. That said, Marchand is one of the best puck protectors in the league for any size and stature, let alone his. And I think Poitras has shown the tenacity and the workmanship that you need as an NHL player in general, but especially as somebody who's a little bit undersized. So they don't have the natural size, but what they lack in size, those two players have in competitiveness, and that's huge. So I think that having Poitras with DeBrusk and Marchand, and then Zacha with Pasternak and Van Riemsdyk, I think that's the closest emulation you could have to like kind of what the Bruins had last year as far as line structure. Like I think having the ability to slot Charlie Coyle back in a third line to start the year with Geeky and Frederick, or Frederick, whomever, Heinen, but like we've seen Heinen and Coyle have chemistry 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was. So it's like, whatever the case may be, neither one of us on this podcast thought that the Bruins could enter the season with Coyle and or Zacha being a 3C. So you've just slotted people, and yes, you're putting a lot of eggs in a 19-year-old's basket, but from what we've all seen, like there's a much higher offensive ceiling for that line of Marchand, DeBrusk, and Poitras as there is with Marchand, DeBrusk, and Coyle. Like Coyle has a higher floor than Poitras probably this season, but the upside for Poitras is just, it's very evident. And I really do think, I've never once questioned Zacha's ability and JVR's ability to play with Pasternak. I think that no matter who Pasternak plays with, they'll score. And you saw Zacha play with him all last year, and JVR, as we saw last night, he can keep up, right? And he actually, Scott, I won't take your point on JVR. I'll let you say that later. But I have not been worried about the combination of Pasternak, Zacha, and whomever, right? I have been nervous about the combination of Marchand, Coyle, and DeBrusk. It just doesn't. I know people say Coyle has a two-way game that's kind of like Bergeron. Obviously, we know it's not apples to apples. I don't know. I'm a little bit like weary of that combination. I think they're going to struggle to score 5-on-5 unless they just get a ton of production from the back end when they're on the ice. Poitras just has that natural ability to create things and to create scoring chances and drive to the net, and his vision is amazing. And as we saw last night, he takes pucks to the net. Scott, I know what you said about him having to shoot more, and maybe that could be a benefit to going back down to juniors. That said, you can go down to juniors and learn how to shoot more, but when you get to the NHL level, that pace of play is such a dramatic increase that it's almost like you have to relearn how to do it.
That's my point. That was my point.
But what Scott's saying is valid too. Like, I'm not discrediting what you're saying. I guess what I'm saying is, like, to Bridget's point, I think the most valuable development is his ability to adapt to the NHL pace of play. And of course, you can only do that at the NHL level. But this development is amazing. Like, having a second line center not be named Coyle or Zacha is something that's just like, things start to slide into place more. And there's more roster personnel decisions that we can discuss in this podcast. But certainly Poitras has made things very interesting. And his development and emergence is kind of sliding people into their natural positions right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's been somebody that after every game we're like, can we talk to Matt Poitras? He's been the interest of all the media attention, but even around the city, people who are just hearing and tuning in and maybe kind of thought the Bruins were going to not be worth watching this year. And then all of a sudden there's this excitement with a young center that's doing things that has us thinking he could even be a top 2 center, even in his first year in the NHL. And when you think about like making a comparison from Bergeron, I think Zacha and Bergeron are probably the closest comparison that you can make. Zacha's game is more similar to Bergeron's on the power play, the way he plays the bumper, just his two-way style of play, I think is pretty similar to Bergeron. And then we kind of get to see these flashes of Poitras looking a little bit like Krejci and being that kind of playmaker, non-physical playmaker that thinks the game at a different speed than other people. And that is something that you can't really teach. And that is something that if you can do that at an NHL level, then you're set up for success. And and he's going to be 19 until March, I believe. So he's going to be a teenager for a majority of the season if he sticks around. I like him on the second line better than the third line. I'm not sure how well of a fit it was a small sample size, obviously. And he played with Frederick and he liked playing with Frederick, according to what he said after the game. But Frederick's not Jake DeBrusk. Frederick is not getting open the way that Jake DeBrusk gets open. Frederick, it's a totally different style of player that if you have him next to, you're opening up more offense for that second line. And no knock on Charlie Coyle at all, but we already seen what he can do with Trent Frederick, and we've liked the chemistry they've had in the past. So if you're able to keep that together and see that Poitras can handle second line center, and who knows, hiccups could be coming. If we're saying if he does get the 9 games, who knows, maybe he doesn't do as well as he did in the preseason in those, but I haven't seen anything that makes me think he wouldn't be able to handle it. And he's going to get flexibility to make a few mistakes here and there. So if you go read Scott's roster projections, he lists all his reasons, but in terms of the top 6, I do agree with that. And then to get to who now doesn't make the cut and who does make the cut.
Just to round out a couple closing thoughts, it's, you make the Zacha as kind of more, at least a facsimile of Bergeron in terms of style. Poitras, I've made that Krejci comparison before as well. So it's a little odd then that we're putting, it's Pastrnak being with Krejci, but we're going to give him the Bergeron type center, and Martian's always been with Bergeron, but we're giving him the new Krejci. But I think that makes all the sense in the world.
Perfection line. There was the perfection line. What about the perfection line? That encompassed all of them back, and that was a good line for a long time. So
yeah, I just I think the way we have it lined up though makes all the sense in the world, because one, Pastrnak and Zacha do already have chemistry, and I think on a line where Pastrnak and Van Riemsdyk are the wings, you want a center who already knows the system, especially defensively, and is going to be able to do that work in the D zone, because as we know, Pastrnak can sometimes drift in and out a little bit defensively. JVR, I think, is probably a better defensive player than people might realize or know, but it's not, it's not contending for Selgies. And then with Poitras, it's you want to give him wingers who, can help him out defensively and help, lift him up there. And Marchand obviously can. And I think DeBrusk has made big strides, especially since getting put on a line with Bergeron and Marchand. Earlier in his career, when DeBrusk would get moved down the lineup or held, he scratched, it was always because of defensive stuff. It was he would just kind of lose focus, not pick up his guy, whatever. And that has almost been completely beaten out of his game over the last year plus. One of the challenges to him is now keep that going. Especially if he does end up with Poitras as a center, it's you want Montgomery, Chris Kelly, whoever, really driving home for DeBrusk that hey, you're now one of the guys to count on. The same way, Bergeron and Marchand helped you out, it's up to you and Marchand to help Poitras out now. So you hope he embraces that and doesn't allow any of those good habits to slip just because Bergeron's not next to him anymore. But yeah, and on Coyle, it would kind of suck for him. He's been preparing all summer, he's going to be a top 2 center. We talked to him a few days ago, and he said that that he was looking forward to that opportunity. And you played your whole career hoping to end up in a role like this, and I'm sure there'd be some disappointment if he's immediately getting put right back on the third line, but he's also, he's a pro's pro. And I think he would have, after maybe, an afternoon where he's feeling a little down or whatever, I think he'd have the right attitude. And I think he'd understand.
Think about the line last year where Taylor Hall is on your third line and Charlie Coyle is on your third line. And you're talking about players that knew they were playing further down in the lineup than maybe they could have been in other places, but they were completely content with it, and we're very mature about it. Charlie Coyle is a very mature hockey player, the same way Taylor Hall is. So the concept is already understood that you go where you're going to help the team best, and I don't think there's hard feelings about that. And I don't think Charlie Coyle would have hard feelings about it.
I agree. I think for sure, like you go into a summer and you see all the headlines, you see the writing on the wall, Krejci gone, Bergeron gone, Coyle, Zacha, right? And at the last hour, I'm sure Charlie Coyle, just like the rest of us, were kind of like, oh shit, who is this kid? Like he's like an NHL caliber player at 19. Like this kid actually like, is he competing for a top 6 center role right now? Cause
but like it should be like a happy oh shit, we might actually be better this year than we thought we were on paper.
I think it's probably an ego blow when you acknowledge that you're better on paper and at your own expense, not being higher in the lineup. I'm sure he is. You guys mentioned it. He's a pro's pro. And look, Charlie Coyle's 31 years old. Like he's been around for a long time. It's like he's had time to prove himself as a top 2 center. In Minnesota, he had some cracks at the can. In Boston before Holla kind of took that spot, they gave him a shot. So it's not like oh, woe is me with him. Like he's had opportunity for sure, none bigger than what was about to happen this year. And look, NHL seasons are long. There are going to be slumps individually and team wide. There's going to be injuries, and I'm sure there's going to be times where Zacha's with Marchand, and I'm sure there's times where Poitras with Pastrnak. I'm sure there's times where Coyle's with both. So there's ebbs and flows. We've learned that whatever the opening night lineup is, it's always going to fluctuate based on different intangibles. So, but yes, I'm sure it's a little disheartening, but at the same time, okay, he's going to be a big part of this team regardless, and I'm sure he's going to be leaned on defensive assignments, not Poitras, right? Like maybe Poitras gets a lot of ozone face-offs, or who knows what happens here. So, but I'll tell you though, if you're the Bruins, it's a great problem to have because on it, like I said, Bruins management may have thought Poitras was a couple of years away. And sometimes that's what happens. You burst onto the scene and you just nobody gives you anything in life. Certainly not when it comes to NHL roster spots. You kind of have to take it, and that's exactly what he's doing. Because we're not at the point anymore where we're talking about him being a 4C or even a 3C and shuffling Geeky to the side or something like that. Like no, he's taking what we think, speculating right now. We think he's about to take a top 2 center role, at least for 9 games to start this year, which really says a lot about him.
And I think there's a lot of people that weren't paying attention to preseason hockey and might turn their TV on game 1 and go, who the hell's number 51? Like he's playing alongside Marchand. Like who is, if he keeps 51, I'm not sure. He might be able to change it once the season starts if he actually makes the team. But
maybe he's
wearing 51 right now.
Maybe he'll take 37 before it's official in the Raptors.
Probably not. He's 46. No. So who's this number 51 and what's his story and how did he end up as a 19-year-old making it? But I think he's going to be immediately accepted if he plays the way he did in preseason.
Well, yeah. And, we all know better than to judge any hockey talk by sports talk radio, but what? Hey, we work for WEI, so we gotta acknowledge it. But it's like
I'm gonna be on Gresh and Kfoury Thursday to make sure they know what the hell's going on. I'm gonna
good. But yeah, I mean, I've heard first off, you obviously don't hear a lot of preseason hockey talk, and I totally get that. Patriots are free falling and potential quarterback controversy and all. I understand why preseason hockey doesn't quite make it into a primetime drive. But I've heard Poitras' name pop up a couple times, and it's been met with dismissiveness of he's not really going to make the team. And to your point, Bridget, it's I think people are kind of slow to catch on to this and realize that no, he's very much forcing his way onto at least the opening night lineup, at least that 9-game sample. And even it was interesting. Even last night. Poitras is in the starting lineup, so he gets announced to the crowd. And not that like I expected him to get like as big of an ovation as Martian Allmark, who got by far the loudest, but I did think like his ovation was like kind of muted, it was like it felt like even that crowd at the Garden last night at the start of the game wasn't like, oh my god, we're all in on Patromania. It was
He did get a big cheer when he had a partial breakaway up the right side of the ice, but Marchand ruined it by being way offside. It was going to be a good scoring chance, and all of a sudden everybody was like they're cheering for him as he was breaking up.
Yeah, and then of course he scores and gets a huge ovation for that. But just saying, like, just going into the game, it felt, you would think if the crowd's really, if like everyone's thrilled about this, and part of it is like he wasn't their number one prospect as recently as this summer, right?
And like it's already been sent down. He's one
right for 2 years. It's been all Lysell and Lohrei. Those are the top two prospects. Those are their only two blue chip prospects. Those are the two untouchables in trades. It's been all of them, and it's like Poitras has just been this very rapid growth and development as a player, and it feels like it might take until opening night for like people to actually realize like what's happening.
I will say this podcast, and I'm not talking tongue in cheek, like we did take note of his in real time of how he was doing in Guelph last year, and I'll speak for myself here. Like I definitely viewed him as at least a middle six center of the future for this Bruins team. Maybe that meant third line for his career. Maybe it meant second line, or I didn't know, but I was confident enough in him as a prospect based on his watching him in juniors and keeping tabs on him. I definitely had confidence that the Bruins found a good NHL player in him in time, but I did not see it happening this fall at all. And he still has to prove it in the regular season. But Bridget, you mentioned he's going to get some rope. For sure, he's going to get some rope. I mean, everybody gets rope in the NHL. Everybody makes mistakes. But he's going to learn from them. And, how good of a preseason has he had? He's had such a good preseason that he not only is about to win the Bruins second line center position, but I heard that Bill Belichick is making calls if he can throw a football. So that's how good of a preseason he's had. 2C by day, QB by night. So that's stuff.
He's Canadian. I don't know how much they toss around a football up there, but you want to know how good he's had of a preseason? We're 32 minutes in, and he's the only player we've really talked about. We're 32 minutes into this podcast. There is one other center, though, that's been putting his name out there and potentially going to make the team, and that's huge for Sweeney, that he has two centers that are young and are potentially going to fill those roles in the bottom six for Beecher, maybe in the top six for Poitras. But Johnny Beecher had another strong game. We talked to him after the game as well. I asked him if he feels like he made the impression that he wanted to in the preseason, and he said, yeah, he thinks that he showcased what he can do offensively and defensively. Scott, in your roster projection, you have him as the fourth line center, which is something that we kind of had gone back and forth about last episode. But what really clicked for me as thinking he's definitely ready for that role was there was one shift. He wears number 19 and Zacha wears number 18. And there was one shift where I'm like, wow, he's really a strong skater. Like, look at him go. And it wasn't Zacha. It was Beecher's jersey was just folded where it looked like an 18 instead of a 19. And I was like, oh my God, that's Johnny Beecher. And he looked good. Like, he looked smooth and he looked strong.
Yeah. And you see the difference that his speed makes. Not just like, oh, he gets out to open ice, but gets the puck on a stick in the D zone and he can start a breakout with his speed, with his skating. And, last night you see him, he gets one chance where he just blows right through the Washington defense and ends up on a breakaway and he doesn't finish, which, you'd like to see him finish, but just to create a chance. And then that line ends up scoring when Lauko and Lucic are doing most of the work through the neutral zone, just kind of plowing ahead, keeping a bouncing puck going. And then, Lauko kind of taps it to Lucic, but it's Beecher driving the net, again, putting pressure on the defense, putting pressure on the goalie. And Lucic's pass for him ends up deflecting off Sonny Milano's stick and going in. But again, Sonny Milano's stick is in a dangerous spot because Johnny Beecher is driving hard to the net. So you see him doing a lot of good things. I think he's been good defensively. We know he would be used on the penalty kill. I think he's been fine there. Jim Montgomery yesterday acknowledged that they really haven't focused a ton on the penalty kill in practices yet. So I know that their penalty kill has not been great this preseason. They've given up a lot of high danger chances, but they just haven't really focused on it a ton. So that'll be a project for the next week leading up to opening night. But yeah, I liked that line that they had last night as their opening night fourth line, which is Beecher centering Lucic and Lauko. I think Beecher and Lauko add an element of speed that I think is a good compliment to Lucic, and honestly, it kind of forces him to keep up. And Lucic and Lauko obviously can bring the physicality, and I think that also helps drag some physicality out of Beecher, who I think has made an effort to become a more physical player and use his body and, throw a check when it's there. I don't think that comes naturally to him. So I think it's something that being around two guys that it does come pretty naturally to will help him. He's won 63% of his faceoffs this preseason. That's huge. We know Jim Montgomery wants another left shot faceoff guy other than Zaka, and Beecher's that to me. So yeah, I've said on our last podcast that I feel like I'm higher on Patrick Brown than most people who are, it seemed like they were just ready to throw him in the trash. I think Patrick Brown can be a useful player. I just think at this point he's been beaten out by Johnny Beecher. I didn't think Patrick Brown had a very good game on Monday. I'll admit that. Just think Beecher's been better overall this preseason. So, to me, yeah, like if you're truly rolling out your best lineup, 1 through 12, to me, Beecher's in it and Patrick Brown's not.
Yeah, I think you just can't just ignore who the best players are being in camp. If somebody plays their way into a role, you should reward them. And I just feel like for years, the Bruins have been a team where there's not a lot of room at the table. And when it comes to a couple of open spots, the Bruins have always leaned to the more conservative. Like, let's go with, the sure thing, the safer option, the veteran option.
Tomas Nosek, for example, over Jack Stanika.
Yeah, that's an example, and
which turned out to be the right call. Worth mentioning.
Sure, it's true. But just like my point, and for what that Bruins team was, I don't disagree, but I think the Bruins need to recognize, and to their credit, I think they are, that they're at a different point in their franchise right now. They're turning over a new leaf. It's the centennial season. So you're celebrating the past, but a lot of this season really is about looking forward to the future and building. And you just can't have a season where you just throw a bunch of new kids on a team, because if you do, the chances are that'll be a bad season, right? That's what people call a rebuild. But they still have a lot in place right now where they can afford to be competitive while having an infusion of youth where applicable. And Johnny Beecher is a perfect example. It's like, don't settle for Patrick Brown when you have somebody who is younger, better, more skilled, and is outplaying him. So why shouldn't he? You see his first round talent on display with his foot speed and his tenacity. I mean, he's giving guys fits in the neutral zone. He's closing space. He's doing very swift and suave stick lifts on defensemen when they're trying to regroup and just pickpocketing them and going in on a break. And quite frankly, I see more than just a career fourth line center in Beecher. I think he has talent to be more higher in the lineup in time. But I Scott, I think you're right. I think that the Bruins probably roll out that fourth line of Lauko, Lucic, and Beecher, and I think that's exactly what they should do. It's worth mentioning, I also was impressed by Trevor Kuntar last night as well. He kind of has a little bit of Jacob Lauko in him too, and with maybe a little bit more control. So he's somebody who I think is having a strong camp as well. But
he was one of the transactions, however, to be assigned to Providence's training camp today, or I think it was this morning. There were a few transactions that I don't know if you wanted to get into them real quick, Scott, but there's been cuts made, players put on waivers, guys assigned to Providence's training camp. And those guys, Beecher and Poitras, have survived all of those cuts so far. So, Scott, I think you have the list up right now if you just want to go over it.
So Trevor Kuntar, Mark McLaughlin, Georgi Merkulov sent to Providence, Jason Magna placed on waivers, and then all the guys who were placed on waivers Tuesday cleared. So that's Anthony Richard up front, and then Alec Regula, Dan Renouf, Riley Walsh, Parker Wotherspoon on defense. So far the Bruins have not lost anyone on waivers, which isn't surprising. They haven't, really waived anyone that I think would get the attention of other teams. But yeah, on Kuntar, I thought he had a really strong camp, and this is his first full year as a pro. This was his first full training camp. So very good. And he was coming off an injury at the end of BC season last year. So really impressive. I thought he brought an all-out effort. He only got into 2 games, but both games in practice, he was noticeable with his effort. So I mentioned he only played 2 games. He led the Bruins in 5-on-5 shots on goal, 5-on-5 scoring chances, and 5-on-5 expected goals. Like it wasn't just, sort of like that blind hustle where you run around with your chicken, like a chicken with your head cut off. Like he was making good things happen with that hustle and with that effort. So yeah, he wasn't NHL ready, but he certainly made a good impression. And suddenly I think it's kind of on. Oh. No, I was just going to say, suddenly, I think he's on your radar as hey, this guy might be closer to, at least potentially being able to help in a call-up situation or whatever. He's now somewhere on the organizational depth chart and not just we drafted him and we signed him out of BC, and so we'll throw him in Providence and see what happens. Now it's oh, okay, that's a kid who's, he knows what he's doing and, can potentially be a useful player down the line.
I also don't know if we've had it. Bridget, you're on mute. I also don't know if we've had an opportunity to record ever since Fabian Lysell got assigned to Providence's camp. Do we have a chance to speak on that?
We haven't.
I don't remember. No, yeah, I think that happened after our last podcast.
So no surprise there. We thought that, but
yeah. And just the one thing I was going to say about Kuntar before my microphone would not turn on, was that he decided not to go back to college. So he decided to bet on himself. It was time to move on to the NHL. By all accounts, Boston College is supposed to have a really good team this year. And his line mates are still there. I mentioned 2 other guys drafted by the Bruins that are still there. Gasso is one of them, but he decided to move on from college hockey and try to make the pros. And he made a lot of his opportunity when he did get a chance. So he's a tough guy. I think I mentioned this last podcast. He will mix it up every once in a while. In college hockey, you can't fight, obviously, but he was always mixing it up after the whistle. So he's dropped down, like we mentioned, just another person to consider in the depth chart.
So to start the regular season, is it 13 forwards on the NHL roster?
Most likely. I mean, you can keep a maximum of 23 players, but the Bruins probably will only have enough cap space to keep 22. So I imagine that'll break down to 13 forwards, 7D, 2 goalies.
Okay. So, and Scott, you asked us a rapid fire last episode about some of the bubble forwards and where we kind of think what their chances. I feel like I'm in a better place to answer that now. And I know you have an article about roster projection. So I'm going to tee this up for you two and say that the 12 forwards that we, based on our conversations on and off the podcast, I think we all agree the 12 forwards that will make the opening night roster. Okay. And that would be JVR, Zacha, Pasternak, Marchand, Poitras, DeBrusque, Geeky, Coyle, Frederick, Lucic, Brown, Lucic, Beecher, and Loco. That's 12. So that leaves Jesper Boquist, Danton Heinen, AJ Greer, Oscar Steen, Patrick Brown. Those 5, and I'm maybe missing a 6th, but those 5 for one spot, which would be the extra forward. Who do you guys feel is gonna, based on so far, earns that 13th forward spot?
Yeah, so in my projection, I have it as Danton Heinen, who I think has had a good camp, has played well. I think you see basically the same player you saw last time he was in Boston, which is he's not the flashiest, he's not the most physical, but he just does a lot of things right. He makes good hockey plays. He's a smart player. He's good defensively. He can play either in a 13th forward role. He can play either wing. He can move up and down the lineup a little bit, and he's never really going to look out of place. I think that's kind of like an ideal player to have in that role. To me, the competition for me boils down to him or Boquist, who I think Boquist can do a lot of those things. He just doesn't have as much experience. I think if you go that route, you're kind of betting on Boquist maybe still having some upside. He's 24, going on 25, so he might not be done developing. But I think Heinen's a better player right now. I think he's been better this preseason. So, that they all have their assets, right? Like Greer has the physicality and willingness to drop the gloves, but that's kind of a duplicate of what Milan Lucic is here to do. Patrick Brown provides center depth, but I think he'll probably clear waivers, so you can send him to Providence. Who else? Oh, Oscar Steen. Hey, look, credit to Oscar Steen for bringing it this camp. He's still around. He has not been sent down yet, but ultimately, I don't know that he brings quite as much to the table. But we'll see. He is a player who has to go on waivers if he's going to get sent down. So,
and he was a player in the same position after last training camp. He made it through all the way to the last round of cuts as well. Last training camp. So there is definitely something about his game that Montgomery likes, and that the organization doesn't necessarily want to risk the waiver wire. So I have him outside.
They did waive him last year.
They did. He made it through, but there was definitely a conversation about, we're not sure he's going to make it through waivers. So he's another person that you have to take into consideration that. However, I feel like he's one of the odd men out in your equation. I have not been impressed by Boquist. I would rather see Heinen or Greer. Boquist is somebody they signed as a free agent, and he was kind of going to be a reclamation project for whoever brought him on, because he just previously hadn't reached his ceiling. But I think the fact that Beecher and Poitras both did what they did really pushed some of these guys out. And he's somebody that we originally had projected in the bottom 6 that I no longer feel he is one of the 6 best players for that spot. So if you want to keep it heavy and keep Greer, who already has been with the team, or if you want to go with Heinen, who, even though it was a while ago, he's been with the team and also played for Montgomery in the past, like those seem like the safer bets to me.
Yeah, what you said is exactly right, Bridget. The emergence of Poitras and Beecher, quite frankly, I just think they've forced their way into 2 roster spots that I think the Bruins probably expected to be available for Boquist or Heinen when they brought him in on a PTO and Boquist as a free agent. And then you have AJ Greer as like your 13th forward. Like you have 2 guys I think that the Bruins penciled in their top 13 forwards until Poitras and Beecher just took those roles. And again, it's speculative at this point because we don't know for sure, But based on what we've seen and just, our intuition and what everybody's talking about, and everybody's watching the same games that we are. And that to me is awesome. Like, that is so great to see, because you're watching two homegrown talents and draft picks force their way onto the NHL club, as opposed to, free agents and PTOs. Like, this is great to see. And so it's going to be a very fun season. Like, all of a sudden, like, there was a lot of intrigue with this Bruins team, especially up front going into this year. And it was kind of like, well, they're good in the back end, they're good in goal, and they have enough up front to stay in the mix, but scoring might be a struggle. And I'm not trying to put too much pressure on Poitras and Beecher on this team, but there's just a ceiling there that if they could potentially get close to reaching that, or it's just everybody, there's a butterfly effect of people falling into place now. And I can't wait to watch it. So it's going to be fun. I think the Bruins, I think they have, I guess, in full disclosure, I agree with you guys on Heinen. I don't know if I said that, but there's a lot of familiarity there. I think, he has more versatility than Greer up and down the lineup, obviously. And yeah, Boquist has done the opposite of Poitras. Like, Poitras, like, he's forced you to keep him here, and Boquist just hasn't. And so I think he's probably the odd man out, along with potentially Greer. I think Heinen might be that guy. I think we're all on the same page there.
Yeah, it's like, you think about it, it's like, well, the Bruins signed Boquist to an NHL contract while Danton Heinen was still available, right? Like, they didn't sign Heinen, they end up bringing him on a PTO. But then you just watch him, and it's like Jack Edwards made a comment during last night's game, and he was like I think it was after like a good offensive zone shift Heinen had, and he was like, how could he not make the team? Something along those lines. And Brick said something to the effect of like, well, he's clearly an NHL player. Like, he's done it. He's played all over the lineup on multiple good teams. And it's like, yeah, true. Like, I don't know why he was still a free agent. I don't know why no one signed him. But you put him out there, and it's like, oh yeah, like, he could fit in any team's bottom six anywhere. And to me, it sort of almost just feels like overthinking it to, like, to look at Boquist and be like, well, his upside, and because he's a better skater, like, Boquist does bring some speed. I don't know that he always uses that speed effectively from what I've seen this preseason, but like, I see the appeal. But it just kind of feels like overthinking it, almost like you're hoping that Boquist, can be Heinen or maybe something slightly better. But it's like, or you can just pick Heinen and you know exactly what he is.
And he has an edge, right? Heinen has the edge of having a relationship previously with Jim Montgomery. So if it goes to the final stage of, okay, we have these two things.
Yeah, and a relationship previously with Charlie Coyle. So
yeah, I mean, he's got the upper hand there.
Charlie Coyle, Jim Montgomery, and and another handful plus of Bruins who were on the team when he was back on the Bruins. So there's and that's why also maybe AJ Greer has a leg up on Boquist, because if the Bruins have to send a guy away, you're either sending away Heinen, who has those relationships, Greer, who has those relationships, or Boquist, who has none of them, right? So and outside of their performances.
Yeah, and Greer is well liked in the locker room. Just putting that out there as well as something that, like, one of the intangibles that could be working in his favor. Besides the fact that he's also willing to fight whenever it needs to be done.
Greer would be, if they do end up waiving Greer, like, it'll be interesting to see if he clears or not, because I think he could. I mean, first off, there just aren't a lot of guys getting claimed off waivers in general, because everyone kind of has their roster and no one has cap space. But I could see someone looking at him and saying, hey, he played 61 games on the greatest regular season team ever. Our team could use some toughness, and all of a sudden someone claims him. He's also, AJ Greer is actually, because he signed his contract before last season for the league minimum, and the league minimum went up, he's actually making below league minimum right now. So it's not, I think it's like a $12,000 difference or something, but he's literally like as cheap as you can possibly get.
Yeah, so that makes him a target to be grabbed, and maybe a reason why you don't waive him and instead you have to cut Heinen. And that leaves us to the defense. Mason Lohrei, who we talked a lot about last episode, and Brian, you're really high on, showed his offense again. He scored in Tuesday's game, and Montgomery after the game said he really liked the way that he was jumping into the offense. And I just didn't know if you think he changed his positioning in where he stands in the depth chart.
Personally, I think that his skating ability, his mobility, his puck movement, his offensive awareness, ability to jump into the play, create offense in the back end, especially where we still need to see it to believe it, that outside of David Pastrnak and a couple others, that this offense can produce enough on their own. I think he would help this team right now. I also believe that he has some improvements to make, especially in his own zone. And I understand that he's not a finished product. And I don't think they need to necessarily rush him into the lineup just yet, because defense is it's a position of strength for them regardless. I think that but at the same time, it's like you watch Derek Forbort and it's like, well, is he mistake free? No. Does he move the puck well? Not really. I mean, how many times I feel like 70% of the passes he makes are behind the person he's trying to pass it to. And yes, there's deficiencies for Lohrai's game. He still has to develop, but okay. Like literally every defenseman makes mistakes every game. So you live with those too, right? I mean, Charlie McAvoy makes mistakes every game. Lindholm makes mistakes every game. So if we're going to watch a player and be like, oh, well, he lost an edge there, or, where that you were on the ice for a goal. Okay, so everybody's on the ice for goals against. The question is, does his upside outweigh the negatives at this point in his career? So look, I think that, like I said last podcast, I feel like an eventual top four of Lindholm, McAvoy, Carlo, and Lohrei, I think should be inevitable down the line, which means that one of Forbort or Grzelcyk would probably be moved out at some point if the Bruins could. Like, if you're third, hear me out for a second. If your D pairs are like, McAvoy, Lohrei, Lindholm, Carlo, and Grzelcyk, Shattenkirk, what's wrong with that? Like, that's pretty damn good to me. So I don't need to see it on October 11th necessarily. If the Bruins start the season with Lohrei in Providence, no problem. I just think he'll be on the team at some point this year. So I like his game. There's no rush. Like Poitras, there's kind of in my opinion, like there's more of a need there. Like you want that center depth and you want that center upside. The Bruins, that's a position of need, right? Lohrei on the left D, not necessarily right now. So it's a bit of a different situation. He's had a great camp, and I think his future's bright. Maybe not opening night he'll be on the lineup, but I think he'll be on the lineup at some point this year.
Yeah, I think first off, I agree with like everything you just said. I think the natural reaction from anyone looking at a lineup with Forbort bumped out is, well, penalty kill. And it's like, yeah, I get it. Like what he brings there is valuable, and you'd rather have Forbort standing in front of shots than Lohrei or Lindholm or whatever. Grzelcyk, we know, doesn't have he doesn't have as much reach if he's out there. But as we've talked about in the past, like if Forbort's not in your lineup, you can find other ways to kill penalties. Like your penalty kill doesn't have to be, well, just stand in front of the one timer. Like you can play in a way that takes away the seam pass, takes away that one timer. Like you can do other things, right? Like not everyone on the penalty kill has to be willing to stand in front of every slap shot in order for a penalty kill to be effective. Yeah, there's going to be times where you have to do that, but you can, like, I think the 6 guys they would roll out, I think you would have enough guys there with some defensive smarts and with reach, because obviously Lohrei is a big guy too, that you could still put together an effective penalty kill. I'm with you, though, that Lohrei probably starts in Providence, in part because I think you want to keep as much. We know injuries on the blue line happen every year, so you want to keep as much depth as possible. So I'm in no rush to trade away Grzelcyk or Forbort. I don't think you can get much for them at this point anyways, because, again, anyone bringing those guys in is probably a pretty good team that's like just looking to fill out, one more hole on D. But those teams don't have cap space right now. So you're not eating salary to move them. Like, you might as well. It's a strength. Like, your defense is a strength. And I know there's people out there who are down on Grizzly and forward or whatever. But, I was looking at, like, The Athletic has recently rolled out their rankings of like everyone's position group. And I think the Bruins were third or fourth on defense. It was like only Carolina, I think Vegas and maybe Colorado ahead of them for better D cores 1 through 6. And it's like, yeah, that seems right to me. So roll with what you have to start. And then if there's an injury or if someone's struggling, Lorai's the next man up. So let him go play 25 minutes a game in Providence, play in every situation, work on his defensive game, work on getting more physical. And then if and when something happens, you call him up and he might run with it and never look back. But for now, I don't see any harm in starting him in Providence.
No. I did want to ask one more time about a guy that we haven't talked about that much, and that's Shattenkirk. Obviously he's a veteran, and veterans in preseason don't necessarily go as hard as some of the kids trying to crack the lineup, trying to steal spots. Do you think he's safe where he is in the depth chart, or do you think he's at risk of potentially being bumped out at some point?
I think he's safe for now, but I don't think it'd be the worst thing in the world to have someone pushing him, which is part of the reason why the one change on defense in my latest projection is I now have Ian Mitchell as the 7th defenseman over Jacob Zaboral. I think Mitchell's had a good camp. He's a right shot. He, I think, could be like basically a 1-for-1 replacement for Shattenkirk. Doesn't have nearly as much experience on the power play. But in terms of being able to activate, get involved offensively, probably not as good of a passer, but brings some of those same characteristics. And I think if you have someone like Mitchell who's pushing Shattenkirk, I think you're right that like he's a veteran who I don't think we've seen his best game this preseason. I think he's still a good player. I think he was pretty good last year on a bad Anaheim team where he was forced to play top 4 minutes. Like, now you're putting him on a better team in a third pairing role. I think he'll be fine. But yeah, he hasn't had the best preseason performances. I'm not super worried about it, but whether it's Mitchell or, it was notable that Matt Grzelcyk played on the right side last night. Like, I don't know, something they were taking a look at. So that could become an option too. Yeah, you have options, but I think Shattenkirk's pretty safely in the opening night lineup, at least.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's one of those situations where it's like they brought in Mike Motto, like back in like 2012, like an old veteran guy that like doesn't really have any. Like, I think Shattenkirk still can play, especially in the limited role that Scott mentioned. And you can't discount his being a champion in this league and being a part of a high-powered offensive team in Tampa Bay, a well-structured defense in Tampa Bay. I think it's just, he's going through the motions a little bit in preseason. I think he's a good presence to have on the back end, on and off the ice. And I don't think he should be worried just yet. And I honestly think that there's room for him to be a good fit. And it's kind of like a good fit for him at this point in his career. Just play third line. Third deep pair. And yeah, go out there and if you have, PP2 or whatever they ask you to do. I think he's going to be a net positive for them. I think over Clifton, maybe. I know I bring up Clifton because it's kind of the natural comparison in and out, but different players. But yeah, the D-core's no worse off because Shattenkirk's on the team this year over Clifton.
All right. I think
also Shattenkirk's a great interview, and I'm all for keeping any and all great interviews. It's one reason I would be bummed to see AJ Greer go, but
Bridget also worth mentioning. I'm not even being funny right now. They're growing on me.
I told you they would. I told you.
I still wish it was their normal yellow but the actual design, they're growing on me. And add in the third jersey that I really like that they're going to probably wear 15 times because of the original 6 games that they're using them every single time. I think if the Bruins just take these uniforms next year and just substitute the glitter gold for like the yellow they've always used, let's rock and roll for the next 100 years.
I think I've come around on the white ones quite a bit for sure. The black ones still feel a little off to me, but we'll see. We'll see. They might grow on me at some point as well.
They've grown
It's also
since they were, introduced. They've grown just incrementally as we see them more.
Yeah. Also, I think it's like there's a different perspective of the black ones so far. I've only seen from level 9 at the Garden because I've been at the games, and the white ones I've seen on TV. Like I think this is like hard to explain to people, but like I do think there's like a difference in how I look at them, especially the black ones, because you're looking down and you just like notice all kind of the open space just on the top half of the uniform until you get to the 47 stripes on the sleeves.
Right. And then, but to your point, like on TV, like, so if I was in your position where I'm just watching it from a bird's eye view, I'd probably feel the same way. But similar to how you watch them on the road, like when you're watching them at home on Nesson, during play, it still takes some getting used to. I like the design in general as a hockey uniform. For me, it was always like, you don't look like the Bruins. You look like a Vegas alternate jersey. But, between whistles and stuff, like when you see a player skate to the bench or it's like a close-up on somebody and you see the emblem there, like, you get those close-ups and those camera angles on TV you don't see when you're covering the game live. But like I said, I still don't like the gold aspect. And just so the Bruins, I think, know this too, because, and I know this is like the most Brian thing ever, but when they post pictures of like their on Twitter and whatnot or Instagram of 1-1 after 2 or whatever, it's like a picture of a player in action. I think we know who runs their social media, but like they use like a filter that like makes the uniforms look more yellow than like they are in real life. Like they're gold in real life. And then like if they post a picture, you'll notice like it's like saturated, so it looks more like a traditional Bruins color than it does in person. So they're seeing the little criticisms that were out there, and I think they're trying to rectify them in post production.
They saw your DMs.
I mean, I think like that's pretty much what everybody said when they debuted the uniforms. Everybody pretty much said like the design's fine. Too many stripes can be forgiven, but people were just like, it's just the wrong color. Like aside from that, it was fine. So anywho, I guess we'll find out. But you guys are both I think you guys are all set for this episode. Any final comments?
No, I think all good. Got one more preseason game Thursday night. I'm sure, we'll be reacting to that, or maybe, if they do a big round of cuts at some point. But yeah, Jim Montgomery said they expect to be down to basically their opening night roster by the weekend. He said he doesn't imagine having many more decisions to make come the weekend. So, it's all going to be happening over the next couple days here.
All right, Bridget, I'll assume that you're all set. So
Yeah.
I think we'll probably also go over some season predictions and whatnot and standings and stuff like that. Certainly before opening night. So thank you all for listening. We will talk to you very soon.